Mangmei Lang, 25, was an international student living in the town of Campy, New South Wales. When she moved to Australia, she went by the name Michelle. Michelle was an only child, and after losing her father in 2008, she had grown even closer to her mother, May. Her mother described her as a person of immense compassion. She was someone who felt deep empathy for everyone and made a great effort to be a supportive friend, no matter how stressed or sad she herself might be. In 2011, Michelle took a bold step to move from Chengdu, China, to Australia to continue her education. No matter how worried her mother was, she was very proud of her daughter's determination to step out of her comfort zone and grow. May had spent every penny she had to help Michelle make this happen, and she was thrilled to see her daughter achieve everything she knew she was capable of. Some of Michelle's family already lived in Australia, so she moved in with her aunt, uncle, and cousin in Campsie, a suburb of New South Wales. While living there, she got a job and began sending money to her mother. 5 years had passed since Michelle started her new life. She had a great group of friends, loved where she lived, and was doing very well in her studies. After graduating from the University of Technology, Sydney with a degree in business, she began studying at the Sydney Institute of Translation and Interpreting. On the afternoon of Thursday, April 21st, 2016, Michelle met up with a few friends. After spending some time with them, she told them she was going shopping and headed to the Pitt Street shopping centre. She stayed there for a while, browsing the stores on her own and buying a few things. Michelle then boarded a train bound for St. James Station just before 4 p.m. and got off at Campy Station at 4:30 p.m., returning to her apartment. Michelle was chatting with her friends until late in the afternoon, but then suddenly went off the grid. She wasn't answering her phone, there were no posts on social media, where she was usually active, and the next morning, there was no sign of her on campus. Although her sudden disappearance was a cause for concern among her friends and classmates, several days passed and no one reported her missing. 4 days after she was last seen shopping, her aunt returned home from a weekend getaway and became very worried upon learning that her niece had vanished. She immediately went to the police station with her husband, Derek, to file a missing person report. According to her friends, nothing Michelle said or did that day was out of the ordinary. She was her usual self. Security camera footage showed Michelle wearing jeans and a long-sleeved grey top, carrying a red bag over her shoulder. No one was following her in the stores, and from the outside, she didn't appear distressed or upset. Michelle was caught on security cameras shopping at the Mere store in Pitt Street Mall last Thursday at 3 p.m. At 4:30 p.m., she bought a juice before boarding a train at St. James Station and got off at Campsie. Her close friends told police they had been unable to contact her since late Thursday night. While people on social media shared her photo to express their concerns, news channels 60 miles away were reporting another alarming story. A tourist walking by noticed someone floating in the water. Upon closer inspection, he realized the person wasn't swimming. They were face down and appeared to be dead. The Snapper Point blowhole on the central coast of New South Wales is a picturesque yet highly dangerous area, filled with slippery rocks and sharp outcrops. It's a place where someone could easily slip and get injured. On the afternoon of Thursday, April 21st, 2016, Michelle met up with a few friends. After spending some time with them, she told them she was going shopping and headed to the Pitt Street shopping centre. She stayed there for a while, browsing the stores on her own and buying a few things. Michelle then boarded a train bound for St. James Station just before 4 p.m. and got off at Campy Station at 4:30 p.m., returning to her apartment. Michelle was chatting with her friends until late in the afternoon, but then suddenly went off the grid. She wasn't answering her phone, there were no posts on social media, where she was usually active, and the next morning, there was no sign of her on campus. Although her sudden disappearance was a cause for concern among her friends and classmates, several days passed and no one reported her missing. 4 days after she was last seen shopping, her aunt returned home from a weekend getaway and became very worried upon learning that her niece had vanished. She immediately went to the police station with her husband, Derek, to file a missing person report. According to her friends, nothing Michelle said or did that day was out of the ordinary. She was her usual self. Security camera footage showed Michelle wearing jeans and a long-sleeved grey top, carrying a red bag over her shoulder. No one was following her in the stores, and from the outside, she didn't appear distressed or upset. Michelle was caught on security cameras shopping at the Mere store in Pitt Street Mall last Thursday at 3 p.m. At 4:30 p.m., she bought a juice before boarding a train at St. James Station and got off at Campsie. Her close friends told police they had been unable to contact her since late Thursday night. While people on social media shared her photo to express their concerns, news channels 60 miles away were reporting another alarming story. A tourist walking by noticed someone floating in the water. Upon closer inspection, he realized the person wasn't swimming. They were face down and appeared to be dead. The Snapper Point blowhole on the central coast of New South Wales is a picturesque yet highly dangerous area, filled with slippery rocks and sharp outcrops. It's a place where someone could easily slip and get injured or even drown. At 10:30 a.m., a paramedic was lowered by helicopter into the water to retrieve the person. The person had died, but it was immediately clear that this was not a tragic accidental death or even drown. At 10:30 a.m., a paramedic was lowered by helicopter into the water to retrieve the person. The person had died, but it was immediately clear that this was not a tragic accidental death. The victim was a young woman. She was completely naked and had numerous stab wounds on her body. She had been stabbed approximately 40 times, and the fatal wound was to her throat. It was clear she had done everything in her power to fight off her killer, but she had lost her life in an extremely violent and horrific manner. The police determined that, rather than having been dragged from another location to the rocks, she had most likely been left near that waterspout. The chief inspector noted that the sea had been particularly rough that day. When the woman's body was recovered from the water, there were no significant signs of injury from the rocks. Therefore, we are working on the assumption that the most likely scenario is that the woman entered the water through the waterspout, he said.
It was just after 10:30 this morning. Police were called to Snapper Point following reports a woman's body was found face down in a blowhole.
Post-mortem revealed that the woman had suffered a number of wounds, significantly some stab wounds. Our interpretation of the situation is that she suffered a violent assault prior to her death. The description of the woman, who at this point in time have not identified, is an Asian female aged between 20 and 35, medium build, shoulder length hair. She has no distinguishing tattoos or scars on her body. Her body was naked when it was found in the water, and all jewellery had been removed.
Anybody who knows this woman or knows anything about this crime is urged to contact police.
The New South Wales Homicide Squad released a computer-generated image of the person they found. She was a young Asian woman with shoulder-length dark hair, and they nicknamed her Snapper Point Blowhole Janeo. As the news spread more widely, people online began drawing connections between the missing Michelle and the woman in the water. DNA tests confirmed that this person was a 25-year-old student. Things moved quickly, and just one day later, the police took someone into custody. They spoke at length with everyone in Michelle's family and her immediate circle. Her apartment was searched from top to bottom, and digital evidence was meticulously examined. By tracking a car caught on camera heading toward the national park 4 hours before Michelle's body was found in the water, they identified the suspect. This person was Derek Barrett, Michelle's uncle, who had lived with her and reported her missing. Derek, 27, had married Michelle's aunt a few years earlier. Little is known about his background, other than that he previously worked in the IT sector and had been unemployed for some time. After examining Derek's phone, they found some deeply disturbing images. Investigators discovered photos of Michelle tied up in her bed, with her mouth covered in duct tape and a white cloth. The mother of the murdered student, Michelle LENG, thanked the police and the Chinese community in Australia for supporting her family during this difficult time. Mrs. Zhong said she could not put into words the pain of losing her only child. A fund was also established to cover Michelle's funeral expenses and to support her mother. Derek's bail request was denied, and he remained silent in court for the first time as all the charges were read. 2 months later, Derek faced additional charges. In fact, there were 27 charges, including kidnapping for profit and indecent assault. The police established a timeline of events based on the time Michelle was found, CCTV footage, and phone records of Michelle and Derek. Michelle was attacked by her uncle as soon as she arrived home that day. While the house was empty, she was held captive in the bedroom and assaulted. The motive for the crime was clearly entirely sexual. While Michelle was still alive, her cousin came over to the house at one point, but she had no idea that Michelle was being held captive just a few meters away. The police do not know how long Derek kept her alive. All they could say was that Derek stabbed Michelle to death sometime between 4:45 a.m. on Thursday, April 21st, and 10:30 a.m. on Sunday, April 24th. On the morning of April 24th, he wrapped her in plastic and set off for Snapper Point while her phone's data tracked his route. He stopped to grab a snack before heading to Blowhole, then arrived at the cliffside and threw her off the cliff. Michelle had been thrown into the very same area she had excitedly photographed and shared on Instagram while traveling a few years earlier. Derek, who is accused of ending the life of a Chinese student and dumping her lifeless body on the New South Wales Central Coast, was charged with murder and pleaded not guilty. When Michelle's body was found, her family, who had come from China, made a point of attending every court hearing. Shell Lang's distraught mother was supported in court by Derek's wife, who is accused of stabbing her daughter to death. Michelle's mother left the courtroom after promising to make a public statement about her daughter. In China, the murder made national headlines. In Sydney, many international students and their families in China were deeply concerned by the news, while those closest to her struggled to comprehend her violent death. His lawyer stated that his client was struggling in prison and denied the charges against him. The lawyer said his client was very upset and in shock and did not find the Sydney police station very appealing. This is a terrible place to be detained, and I hope he is transferred to another facility in the near future. 18 months later, in December 2017, Derek finally pleaded guilty. He admitted to tying Michelle up and gagging her before killing her and disposing of her body. Derek also pleaded guilty to 21 other charges, including filming Michelle 19 times for sexual gratification. Among the other charges he admitted to were detaining a person for financial gain and committing indecent acts against a person over the age of 16 on 3 occasions. Derek claimed he had a substance abuse problem and was using drugs at the time of the murder. He said he couldn't remember anything about what happened that weekend. The only things he could recall were seeing his own face in the mirror and blood in the sink. However, the judge rejected these claims and said Derek's distress seemed somewhat feigned. Forensic psychologist Dr. Furr told the court that he believed Derek was feigning amnesia to avoid responsibility. Dr. Furr said, "Derek's claim of being a drug addict didn't ring true at all. I've never seen an obese drug addict." Derek displayed a lack of insight into his crimes and a lack of empathy. Taking photos of the victim before her death, with her hands and mouth bound and a look of sheer terror on her face, and dumping her body in a remote location were actions strongly suggestive of sexual deviance. The judge noted that in a letter Derek wrote to Michelle's mother, he stated, "I can only imagine what you've been through because of your loss. In every moment of my life, I wish I could go back in time and undo that day that caused so much pain. I allowed my own problems to spill over into the family home, and as a result, they paid a heavy price for it. This moment in my life has kept me awake at night in tears, and I still have nightmares. I lost everything because of a foolish weekend. My sense of time from that period is blurred. You cannot imagine how much it angers me every day to try to figure out how this happened and why I went down that path. I betrayed my own family and his family with what I did." He stated that he was disgusted with himself. However, Judge Helen Wilson did not believe his words.
It's satisfying that we've got justice, but there's no joy in a matter like this. It's just an extremely sad case.
Very lucky he didn't get life imprisonment.
Derek Barrett stared intently at the floor of the dock throughout the entire sentence, his tears now only for himself. Because while this wasn't technically a life sentence, he could be in his 70s before he is free again.
Derek Barrett was sentenced to 46 years in prison without the possibility of parole. However, the case was not yet over. The investigation had revealed that Barrett harbored an increasingly intense sexual obsession with the woman, and a few years later, the situation became even more complicated. In November 2019, an unidentified elderly woman with dementia who was unable to leave her home was sitting in her house when her daughter knocked on the door to check on her. The daughter found her sitting at the kitchen table, holding a device that the police described as a heavy-duty waterproof USB drive. The woman said she thought it was a toy and couldn't explain how she'd come to possess it. When her daughter plugged the USB into a computer, she saw such disturbing things that she immediately called the police. The USB contained 9 video files totaling over an hour in length and 13 photos. The footage featured Derek and Michelle. Derek had recorded himself raping and torturing Michelle while holding her captive in her room. In one video, Michelle's hands were tied so tightly that they had swollen and turned purple. At one point, Derek cut the tape with a large hunting knife, retied her hands and said, "Well, where were we?" He then continued his brutal assault. Before the murder, Derek had also filmed Michelle and her stepdaughter while they were showering and sleeping. In some videos, he was seen masturbating while watching them sleep. Police were able to match some of the photos to those Derek had deleted from his phone just a few days before his arrest in an attempt to cover up his crimes. The woman in possession of the USB drive had no apparent connection to Derek, though she lived a few miles away from the house where he used to live. However, this part of the case remains a mystery for now. As a result of the contents found on the USB drive, 17 new charges were filed against Derek. These included charges of aggravated sexual assault and indecent assault. The police noted that Michelle's aunt spent a lot of time in Wollongong for work, which is why she wasn't around while all these events involving her husband were unfolding. The aunt was unaware of what was happening and was overwhelmed with guilt. When Michelle's mother received the call about the USB drive, she said she nearly fainted. Through her tears, she said, "When the police told me the video clip showed my daughter being raped in a degrading manner and tortured in a painful way, I almost fainted. My mother, who was in good health, was in such deep sorrow that she passed away shortly after receiving the news. How could any mother possibly accept such news?" Derek Barrett pleaded guilty to 17 charges, but to the family's disappointment, he did not receive a separate sentence. Because the evidence was not disclosed before the first murder trial, the judge considered this a new aggravating factor. He sentenced the defendant to an additional 20 years in prison. However, this sentence will be served concurrently with the murder sentence. In other words, the total prison term of 46 years will remain unchanged. 2 years were added to the minimum parole eligibility period. Thus, he will be eligible for parole in 2052 instead of 2050. Michelle Lang was a hard-working and hopeful person, striving to better herself and one day provide a comfortable life for herself and her mother, thousands of miles away from home. She was working in a place she believed to be safe and living with people she trusted. For Michelle's mother, who lost her daughter first to her husband and then to someone she considered family, these were the darkest of times. She said, "Even today, we still cannot accept the fact that she left us, and we are still in great pain. Time will never bring back the days when we lived happily together with Mang Mei. I no longer have my child. My whole life has been shattered.